How did humans survive the last ice age? 20,000 years ago, the temperature dropped so fast that a child born on open grassland could live to see it buried under ice. The glaciers came from the north and kept coming. At their peak, they stretched from what is now Scotland down through Germany, across Scandinavia, and over most of Canada. Sea levels dropped by 400 feet as water locked itself into ice. The English Channel dried up. You could walk from London to Paris. The Sahara was cold. Parts of what is now Brazil were thin, dry scrubland instead of jungle. The entire planet looked different. And it was getting worse every decade. Most animals died. Most plants died. And most humans died too. Scientists who study ancient DNA estimate that the entire human population at the coldest point may have dropped to somewhere between 10,000 and 30,000 individuals. Fewer people than fill a small stadium. Every person alive today is descended from whoever was left. So who was left? In 1988, archaeologists excavating a site in southern Russia called Sungir found the remains of a man buried about 34,000 years ago. Roughly 40, which in that world meant ancient. His bones showed arthritis in his knees and spine. He had spent decades doing something hard with his body. And he was buried with more than 3,000 ivory beads, hand-carved from mammoth tusk, sewn carefully onto clothing that had long since rotted away. The beads told researchers something important. Each bead took about an hour to make. 3,000 beads. 3,000 hours. That is more than a year of full-time work devoted to decorating one person's burial. In the same site, 2 children were buried head to head, each wearing thousands more beads, carved ivory lances laid beside them, a human femur filled with red ochre placed carefully between them. That is not survival behavior. That is culture. That is a group of people who, in the middle of one of the worst environmental catastrophes in human history, still had time to believe that how they treated their dead mattered. And that belief is part of what kept them alive. In the 1990s, geneticist Spencer Wells began mapping human migration patterns using mitochondrial DNA, genetic material passed almost unchanged from mother to child across hundreds of thousands of years. What he found was a bottleneck. A point in human history where the genetic diversity of our species nearly collapsed, where the branching tree of human variation narrowed to almost nothing before spreading out again. It happened during the Ice Age. The implication is stark. We are all, every single one of us, the descendants of a small group of people who happened to be in the right place, doing the right things at the moment almost everyone else vanished. The question is what those right things were. The needle was one of them. The oldest bone needle ever found is about 50,000 years old, discovered in Denisova Cave in Siberia. It is 2.7 inches long, thinner than a matchstick, with a tiny eye drilled through one end using a tool that no longer exists. To make that needle required tools to make tools, a level of forward planning no other animal has ever demonstrated. But what the needle made possible changed everything. Fitted clothing. Before the needle, humans wore hides draped over their bodies, warm enough in mild cold, not warm enough at -30. The needle allowed seams. Seams meant fitted sleeves, fitted hoods, layered undergarments of scraped hide, boots sealed at the ankle with sinew threads so fine it was nearly waterproof, clothing that worked with your body heat instead of just trapping air against your skin. The Inuit people today still make cold weather clothing using many of the same principles developed during the Ice Age. Researchers who have tested traditional Inuit garments in Arctic conditions found they outperform modern synthetic gear in sustained cold below -40. The needle did not just keep people warm. It extended the range of habitable territory by thousands of miles. Groups that could dress from -30 could follow herds into terrain that killed everyone who came before them. At the peak of the Ice Age, the landscape of Europe and Asia was not a frozen wasteland. It was the mammoth steppe, a vast, cold grassland stretching from Spain to Siberia, teeming with large animals in numbers the modern world has no equivalent for. Woolly mammoths, cave lions, woolly rhinoceros, horses, bison, reindeer, moving in herds that could take days to pass. A single mammoth provided roughly 2,000 pounds of meat, fat enough to sustain a group of 25 people for weeks. Its hide could cover a shelter. Its bones and tusks could frame that shelter and become tools and weapons. Its fat could be rendered and burned for heat and light through the long polar night. Even its stomach could be used as a cooking vessel, filled with water and heated with fire-warmed stones. Nothing was wasted. Everything was understood. Following the mammoths was not a lifestyle. It was a survival strategy. A group that lost a herd had maybe weeks before it starved, and some groups lost a herd. Archaeologists excavating sites across Ice Age Europe have found evidence of something that gets discussed very quietly in the literature. Human bones from this period show the same cut marks as animal bones from the same site, the same scraping along the shaft, the same deliberate fracturing for the marrow inside, done to human remains, after death. Some researchers believe it was ritual. Some believe it was grief, a final communion with the dead in cultures where the body was not separate from the person. And some believe it was exactly what it looks like. Not every group made it through the hard winters on mammoth alone. The margin was that thin. But the evidence that cuts deepest is not the evidence of what broke. It is the evidence of what held. At a site called Dolní Věstonice in what is now the Czech Republic, archaeologists found the remains of a young woman buried about 26,000 years ago. Her skeleton showed severe disability from birth. Curved spine, asymmetrical limbs, bone structure that would have made any kind of sustained physical work nearly impossible. She had lived to her mid-20s. In a world where every calorie was carried on foot and every member of a group was expected to contribute, she had lived for years past the point where the math made sense. She was buried with red ochre painted across her bones, positioned carefully, surrounded by grave goods. She had been fed. She had been carried. She had been kept warm by people who had almost nothing to spare. Archaeologist Eric Trinkus, who spent years studying Ice Age burials, found this pattern again and again. Elderly individuals with healed fractures, children who had survived infections that should have killed them, their recovery requiring weeks of care from adults who could have spent that time doing something else. The groups that survived were not keeping each other alive out of sentiment. Sentiment is a luxury. They were keeping each other alive because a group that abandons its weakest members under pressure and a group that abandons anyone falls apart. And a group that falls apart in the Ice Age does not get a second chance. The Ice Age ended about 11,700 years ago. The glaciers retreated north, the seas rose, the mammoth steppe broke apart into the forests and plains we recognize today, and the mammoths disappeared with it. Humans spread across every continent on Earth, adapted to every climate, and built everything that came after. But the genome that did all of that is the same one you carry right now, built for cold, built for scarcity, built to move, built to keep a small group of people alive by any means necessary, including the ones we don't talk about, and including the one we pretend is a choice. The Ice Age is over. The adaptations are not. When you feel the pull toward your people, the ones you would carry when carrying costs you, that is not sentiment. That is the oldest survival code your species ever wrote.